Welcome to Haggie Reads for You on Wolf Spirit Radio. Colleen, Haggie, reads children's stories for the wee ones up to the teens. She also reads books for grown-ups. Tune in, kick back, relax, and listen in. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.
Hi everyone, it's Colleen, and it is Tuesday, January 12th, 2016, and this is Haggie Reads for You. And today, I found the book at projectgutenberg.org that was recommended to me. The link was shared by Vanessa of our chat room at Wolf Spirit Radio and Haggie Shack Radio. And the book that I'm going to read today is called Alien Minds by Everett. And it says this ebook is for the use of anyone, anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away, or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. The release date, January 7, 2016, ebook number 50863. Produced by Greg Weeks, Mary Meehan, and the online distributed proofreading team at http://www.pgdp.net. This is copyrighted 1955. First edition. Chapter 1. Were you looking for a roast, Nair? An oily voice spoke up just by the elbow of George Hanlon. I have some excellent ones here, sir. Yes, Nair, I want several. If I can find ones to suit me, the young man replied. Nor could anyone glancing at him know he was not a native of this planet. Sisturia, which the interstellar corpsman in self-defense called Estrella, for the cosmetic specialist who handled the Secret Serviceman's disguises had done a marvelous job in transforming the blonde young corpsman into an Australian native. Hanlon continued to look into the outside cages containing these tailless roaches, the Australian equivalent of wild dogs. I want 8, all as near the same size, coloring, and age as possible. 8, did you say? The merchant looked at him in astonishment. Hanlon, carefully reading the surface of the man's mind, sensed the conflict there between the ethics his religion and philosophy had taught him, his natural love of haggling, and a desire to make as much profit as possible. But he could not sense the slightest suspicion that the man confronting him was not another Australian. This was a great relief to Hanlon, for he was still afraid he might be recognized as a stranger and an alien. In his disguise, he was still humanoid in shape, and still is 5 feet 11 inches in height. But in addition to the ragged beard and longish hair, he had undergone outward structural differences that made him seem almost totally unhuman. That's right, 8. I want them to be about 2 years old in good health. Can you supply them? I can if you can pay for them. The native looked somewhat questioningly at Hanlon's cheap clothing. The young Secret Serviceman smiled and jingled coins in his pocket. I can pay. Then come with me, Nair, and we'll find the ones you want. Hanlon followed him inside the peculiar little open-faced stall It was one of hundreds surrounding the great market square of this city of Stiara, largest on the west continent of Australia. His nose wrinkled against the stench of the uncleaned kennels. The Roches, seeing a stranger and perhaps being somewhat upset by his strange alien effluvia, set up the peculiar frenzied yelping that was their customary sound. To Hanlon it was reminiscent of the wail of earthly coyotes. The young corpsman was on a very hair-trigger of caution and tenseness. Despite his splendid disguise, he had plodded through the crowd of the marketplace with a great deal of trepidation. He had seemingly come through all right so far, and he began to relax a bit, yet was still somewhat fearful that he might give himself away by some difference of action or speech, or by breaking one of their customs or taboos about which he knew all too little, despite his briefing and study before coming here. "Have you decided which ones you want, Nair?" the proprietor asked, waving his hand toward the various cages, hardly able to believe he was to make such a large sale. Hanlon said nothing, continuing to scan closely the Roches, for his thoughts were still very much on this, his first prolonged venture into the streets and among the crowds of this strange new world, to which he had been assigned on his second problem. His mind was constantly contacting others. For George Spencer Newton Hanlon was the only member of the Secret Service who was at all able to read minds. But he could read only their surface thoughts, and these Australians had such peculiar mental processes, so different from those of the humans with whom he was familiar, that they were almost non-understandable. So he was still a bit hesitant to start the bickering he knew he must engage in to stay in character. To delay a bit further, he continued examining the animals in the cages, not only with his eyes, but mentally scanning the brain of each, that he might be sure of finding those in perfect health, with minds he could most easily control. "Though how I can expect to find healthy ones in a filthy dump like this, I don't know," he thought. But he finally did. While he was doing this, however, he was reminded of the time he had discovered this ability to read animal minds, and how his subsequent studies had enabled him to control their minds and bodily actions with amazing skill. It was this ability that had led him to this marketplace on his unusual quest. "I'll take that one, and that," he said at last, pointing out one after another the 8 animals he wanted. "Yes, Nair, yes," the puzzled but delighted proprietor said, as he transferred the indicated animals to a single large cage. "That will cost you—" He eyed Hanlon carefully to see if he could get away with an exorbitant price. Something seemed to tell him the stranger did not know just how much Roches customarily sold for, and he decided to raise his asking price considerably. "They will be 7 silver pentas each, Nair, and believe me, you're getting a fine price. I usually get 10 each." He was lucky to get 2, Hanlon read in his mind, "but since this is such a large sale, I can afford to make you a bargain." Hanlon grinned to himself as he computed quickly. 5 iron pentas, he knew, made 1 copper penta. 5 coppers, 1 10 penta. 5 of these, 1 silver penta, and 5 silvers, a gold one. This made the silver piece worth about 1/2 a Federation credit. The price seemed ridiculously low, even with this big markup. Hanlon would willingly have paid it, but he had learned from the briefing tapes, and again now from his reading of the merchant's mind, that they loved to haggle over their sales, made sort of a game of it, so he turned away, registering disgust. A fool you think me, perhaps, he said witheringly. 7 silver pentas, indeed. One would be a great price for such ill-fed, scrawny, pitiable animals as those. The merchant raised his hands and voice in simulated rage, which did not prevent him from running around to face Hanlon's retreating figure and bar his way. Robber, he calls me, then tries to rob me in turn. 6? He suggested hopefully. Hanlon was now enjoying the game and threw himself into it with vigor. I call on Zappa to witness that you are indeed the worst thief unhung. He also spoke loudly, angrily, largely for the benefit of the crowd of natives that was swiftly gathering to watch and listen to this sport. Look, that one is crooked of leg. This one's hair is ready to fall out. That one is 15 years old if a day. I'll give you 2. Yet he knew all the animals were in perfect health, and all about 2 years old. He had carefully selected only such. I ask anyone here, the seller wailed, as he waved toward the crowd that was watching and listening with huge enjoyment. I ask anyone here who knows roaches to examine these you have chosen. They are all exceptional, all perfect, the best in my shop. 5.5. Hanlon turned away again. I'll go find an honest dealer. He started to push through the crowd, but the merchant hurried after him and grasped his smock. Wait, Nair, wait. It breaks my heart to do this. I'll lose a month's profit, but I'll sell them to you for 5 pentas each. To my best friend I wouldn't give a better price. That shows why you have no friends. 3 even. Take it or leave it. Hanlon was still pretending indifference. I'm ruined. I'll be forced out of business, the dealer screamed. They cost me more than that. Oh, why did I rise this morning? Give me 4. Hanlon grinned and dug out a handful of the pentagonal-shaped gold and silver pieces. He counted into the merchant's quivering but dirty hands the agreed-upon 32 pentas. The native looked at them, wordlessly, but his face was a battleground of mixed emotions. Finally, he reluctantly counted out half of them into his other hand and held them out to Hanlon. No, Nair, I cannot overcharge you. 2 is the price. You're an honest man after all, and I apologize, Hanlon said, smiling, as he pushed back the outstretched hand. Those I chose are fine animals, perfect, and the best in your shop. So keep the money. Send them to my room this midday, he commanded. It's on the street of the 7 Moons, at the corner of the street of the Limping Cavall. The house painted pink in front. 2nd floor to the rear. My name, Gore Anlo. It's on the door. He had taken that name on this planet since it most nearly corresponded to his own from among the common Australian names. The roach dealer, well pleased with the outcome, bobbed obsequiously. It shall be done as you say, Nair, and I shall include feeding and drinking dishes. What about food for them? That's right, they'll need dishes and thank you. Let's see your meat. But after examining the poor quality food the merchant displayed, he would not buy. I'll get something elsewhere, if this is the best you have, Hanlon told the man with a disarming smile. Such fine roaches deserve the best. Yes, my food is poor. The dealer moved his hand deprecatingly. I'm glad the roaches are to have such a considerate master. And Hanlon could read in his mind that the merchant actually was pleased. The SS man felt that he had passed this first public test with high grades. In one of the better-class food stalls, Hanlon found some good, clean meat, and the other foods such animals ate. After the customary game of haggling, he ordered a 2-days' supply to be delivered at once, and the order duplicated every other day until further notice. Then he hunted up a suit maker. Here it took a lot of persuasion and the showing of his money before the tailor would even believe that Hanlon really meant what he said when he tried to order 9 uniforms, 8 of them of such outlandish shape and size. For one of them was for himself, and the others for his newly bought roaches. It was only when Hanlon finally lost patience and said sharply, "You stupid lout, I want them for a theatrical act," that the uniform maker realized the reason for such an unusual order. Then things ran smoothly. The design was sketched, and material of a red to harmonize with the grayish tan of the roaches was chosen. The tailor consented also, for an added fee, to rush the job. Hanlon's way home led through part of the district where the larger, better-class shops were located. He stopped in front of one of these. He knew from his studies, and from what he had seen here, that Australia was just at the beginning of a mechanical culture. What sciences and machines they had were unbelievably crude and primitive to him, accustomed as he was to the high technologies of Terra and the colonized planets. This display he was scanning featured their means of personal transportation. There were, of course, no moving slideways, nor even automobiles, nor ground cabs, nor copters. Instead, the Australians used motorized tricycles. Even the smallest of these was heavy, cumbersome, crude, and inefficient, but they were speedier and easier than walking when they worked. The tricycles had large wheels, about 3 feet in diameter, with semi-hard rubber-like tires. There were 2 wheels in back and 1 in front, steered by a tiller level. Because of the weight of the engine and tank for the gas, even the smallest trike weighed several hundred pounds. The fuel was acetylene gas. Hanlon found to his dismay. Electricity had been discovered here, but as yet they knew only direct current. No AC, no vacuum tubes, no telephones, no radios, no television, nor nothing, Hanlon snorted in disgust. But the native scientists and technicians had found how to use their DC to manufacture calcium carbide. Thus, they had plenty of acetylene gas and many ways of using this for power. "I'd lots rather have a good 2-wheeled bike," Hanlon thought to himself, but decided, "Guess I better buy one of these. Probably have to do a lot of chasing around, and since there's no for-hire ground cabs, I don't want to have to walk all the time. Besides, I might have to get somewhere in a hurry." The salesman had first tried to sell him one of the larger 3- or 4-place family-sized tricycles that steered with a wheel. But Hanlon finally made the man understand that he wanted only a 1-man machine, and the purchase was haggled into completion, at a price so low it surprised the young Secret Service man. "Sure is one screwy world." He shook his head as he rode back toward his apartment, after learning how to operate his new machine and its tricky engine. Back in his room, Hanlon reviewed the situation to date on this, his second assignment, for the Secret Service of the Interstellar Corps. He had been at the head of the commission sent to Algon, where he, Hanlon, had been largely instrumental in freeing from slavery the strange, vegetable-like people, the Gudis. The commission had helped them make a treaty with the Federated Planets, by which the natives allowed the humans to mine certain valuable metals from their planet, and to maintain the spaceship yards that had been built by the men who had formerly enslaved them, in return for protection from exploiters, and for certain cultural assistance. Just as his work there was about finished, A message had come from Captain Hanlon to report back to the planet Simonides. There he met his father, Regional Admiral Newton, second in command of the Secret Service. This discrepancy of names was due to the fact that after young Spencer Newton's mother died and his father disappeared at the time he joined the Secret Service, the boy was adopted by George Hanlon, an ex-corpsman and his wife, and had taken his foster father's name. "We're not getting anywhere on Estrella," his father had begun abruptly once they had warmly greeted each other. "I've come to the conclusion, and the Council agrees, that we need your special mental abilities there. But take it easy, Spence, I never can seem to get used to calling you George. Don't try to go it alone. And you can wipe that cocky smirk off your face, mister," he commanded sternly. "This time it's an official order from the top brass. Those Estrellans are distinctly alien, not humans gone wrong." Hanlon sobered down a bit, but secretly could not entirely shake off his attitude, feeling sure he was more than a match for any trouble he might run into. Hadn't he proved it? On Algon and right here on Simonides. Sure he had. Great Snyder, he wasn't a kid anymore. He was a Secret Serviceman of the Interstellar Corps, whom they called in when the rest of them, even his adored dad, failed. "Just what's the problem there?" he asked, trying not to let these thoughts show in his face. "The people of Estrella are not colonists from Terra, or any of the colonized planets," the Admiral explained slowly. "They are native to that world. The first such, by the way, that we would have discovered who are advanced enough to be asked to join the Federation with equal status. They are quite man-like in shape, and of a higher order of civilization. Their culture is much like Earth's was 250 or 300 years ago. Just beginning their real introduction to scientific and mechanical technologies on the planetary scale, eh? That's it. Their system was discovered and mapped a few years ago. The Colonial Board immediately sent psychologists and linguists there to learn their language and study the natives and their form of government, their economics and general advancement. What they found, although far different from our own, was so surprisingly high that we sent them a formal offer to join the Federation. But," he stopped, frowning. "Yes?" Hanlon was interested now and paying close attention. "But what?" "That's what we don't know. At first they seemed very pleased with the offer. They studied it carefully and, at our suggestion, sent a picked group of statesmen, scientists, and merchants on a trip to our various worlds in one of our ships. These men and women seemed delighted with what they found and enthusiastic about their world joining us. But shortly after their return home, and before the final treaties were signed, opposition began to develop. What kind of? All kinds. Enough to make the plans slow down and halt. The embassy sent there couldn't discover the reason. We have trouble enough understanding their way of thinking at all. And they yelled for help. We sent a couple of SS men there, and when they failed, I went there myself to help them, and the embassy come home." He shook his head. "I can't find a thing either that seems significant. Oh, the surface opposition is easily discernible. Papers, handbills, inflammatory speeches by spellbinders, whispering campaigns, all calling for keeping Estrella for the Australians, and running out all foreigners bent on plundering the planet for their own enrichment, that sort of thing." "Maybe some natives who want to take over themselves?" Helen ventured. "Could be. We thought of that, but have found no proof. We have no proof of anything except the opposition. Only one thing that may or may not have something to do with this. We've discovered that Almost simultaneously with this opposition, an unprecedented crime wave started there. Every type of criminal activity imaginable, and that's almost unheard of on that world. But we can't even get the first leads as to who is behind it all. That's why I suggested you be called in, and the staff agreed. The Admiral paused, and his piercing gray eyes bored earnestly into the blue ones of his son. Keep this in mind at all times, Spence, for it is most important. We must succeed there. This is the first non-Terran world we found equal in cultural advancement to ours. But surely it won't be the last. And we must win them over. All civilized worlds must band together for mutual growth and well-being. So this is our most important project now. Yes, seriously, I can see that. Also, that if we do get them to join us, we can point out that fact to any other planets we may discover and try to bring them into the Federation in the future. And lying at ease on a heavily padded bench before the control board of a space cruiser, a stranger looked deeply into the multi-phase scanner that worked on scientific principles not yet discovered by humans. For long months, its mind had been studying this new world and its inhabitants. The language had been learned after a fashion, as had much of the planetary economics and governmental intricacies. Now the minds of the people were being studied. It was searching, always searching, for certain types. But part of that mind remained continually, in that one of a certain Australian it had long ago selected. Chapter 2. So now SSM George Hanlon was here on this planet they called Estrella, trying to see what he could find out. It was hard, devilishly and maddeningly hard, to discern what these people were really thinking. It wasn't their language. That had been fairly easy to sleep-learn from the reels. No, it was their mental processes, the way they thought. He was not too sure of himself yet, even with his ability to read their surface thoughts, for so often those thoughts held connotations he was not sure he understood. For the Australian mind was so different from those of humans. Its texture was coarser, for one thing, and the thought concept symbols largely non-understandable to him so far. He had studied. He winced to think how hard he had studied, and he had practiced assiduously since arriving here. But he still could only get an occasional thought idea of whose meaning he felt at all sure. It was far worse than with humans. True, he was making some progress, but it was so... He grinned mirthlessly, fast like a turtle, yet he did not allow discouragement to keep him from continuing with his work. For during the week he had been here, he had managed to pick up some facts of which he felt sure. He decided his best method of approach lay with this new criminal element, for he was convinced from his study of the problem that they were somehow tied in with whoever was behind all the opposition to Estrella's joining the Federation of Planets. Their tremendous increase in crime, so foreign to the general nature of these high-principled beings, and coming simultaneously with the development of that opposition, was not, he felt sure, coincidental. Working from the inside against a criminal gang had worked on Simonides, it might be equally successful here. He had found what he felt was proof that a certain Eno Yander, this world's greatest purveyor of entertainment, was actually a ringleader in the criminal web, in this city at least, and he had figured that the best way to get acquainted with this man was to pose as an entertainer. Because of his ability to control the minds and muscles of animals, he decided to be an animal trainer, hence his apparently strange action in buying 8 Australian roaches, or dogs. He had figured out an act that he thought was a dilly. At least, he grinned to himself, it would knock him in the aisles on Terra or the human planets. But with these folks, he shrugged away the doubts. Suddenly, as Hanlon was sitting there thinking all these things, he heard a tremendous commotion outside the house. There were the excited yells of many children, a terrific uproar of yelps and whines that he recognized as made by his roaches, and the shrill complainings of the elders living in the adjacent houses. "Uh-oh, my pups are being delivered." Hanlon grinned and ran out to meet the messenger. As soon as he was in sight of the crowd, he began touching one Roachian mind after another, sending them calming thoughts and quieting their frenzied yelpings. By the time the 8 dogs were in his rooms, they were well under control and lay down as soon as they were inside. Hanlon good-naturedly answered many of the questions hurled at him by the inquisitive youngsters, assured the apprehensive neighbors that he would see to it that the roaches did not bother them, dismissed the man who had delivered the animals with thanks and a gold penta, then hurriedly closed the door against the crowd still in the hallway. He then settled down into a comfortable seat and proceeded to get acquainted with his new pets. He first had to learn the texture of their individual minds, which were like, yet different, from those of earthly animals. Then each roach's individual characteristics had to be studied and learned, and the animal's wild nature more or less tamed and subdued, which last he found quite easy to do from within. The animals, in turn, had to become used to Hanlon's taking control of their minds and bodily functions, and of allowing him to handle them mentally without fighting back or trying not to obey. This was eminently tricky work, but Hanlon's previous practice with many animals, birds and insects, both here and on Simonides and Algon, had given him facility, so he was able to do it fairly easily. "Why, they're really just nice little pooches at heart, in spite of that snout that looks like a pig's," said in that flat face. "But I like 'em, and I think this'll work out okay." He fed and watered his pseudo-dogs, and then let them go to sleep, as he was preparing to do. Right after he and the roaches had breakfasted the next morning, he set to work in earnest on their training for the special routines he had planned. As the days sped swiftly by, he found his ideas working out even more satisfactorily than he had hoped. It would not be too long before he was ready to make contact with that Eno Yander, the theatrical agent. The following day, Hanlon stayed in his room again, working with the animals, training them in group maneuvers, having learned how to handle them individually. It was a weird feeling, dissociating part of his mind and placing it in that of a roche, and with that portion of his mind consciously controlling the animal's brain to direct its nerves and muscles to do what he wanted done. And when he did this to 8 roaches simultaneously, well, even though he had done similar things before, it was still hard to get used to the idea that it was possible. So hard had he been working that he was surprised when he happened to notice how dark it was getting. He went over and looked out at the window in his room and saw it was night outside. A glance at the Australian time-teller on the wall, and he saw it was the dinner hour. He rose and stretched, yawning vigorously. "Better get out and get some fresh air," he thought. He took the dogs for a half-hour's run outside and then brought them back, fed and watered them. He impressed on their minds that when they were finished, they were to go to sleep. Then again he left the building. He couldn't help grinning a bit as he was walking down the street, thinking of the screwy way these people handled the problem of where to live. For the common, ordinary, not-so-rich people, there were apartment buildings, such as the one in which he lived, owned and operated by the government. When anyone wanted a room or an apartment, he merely hunted around in the district in which he wished to live, until he found an empty place that suited him, and then he moved in. There was no landlord, no rent. Taxes paid for it. You were supposed to take care of your own cleaning and minor repairs or any special decorating you wanted done. Major repairs were handled upon request by men paid by the government. If your furniture wore out or no longer suited you, you simply moved to a place you liked better. And some other poorer person had to take what you had left, if all other rooms were occupied. Yet so considerate of others were the average Australians that they seldom did this, preferring to replace the worn-out things themselves, if financially able to do so. Imagine the average Terran doing that, Hanlon thought wonderingly when he first heard of it. He had been lucky enough to find a 3-room apartment fairly close to the downtown section of the city, yet far enough away so the crowd noise did not bother him. The building in which he lived was of 4 stories, and he was on the 2nd floor near the back. It was the 3rd place he had looked at when he first came to Estrella. He could not at first make himself believe that all the rooms had such bad smells in them, but he soon found it to be true, largely because these natives had nothing that could be called efficient plumbing. When he had finally picked these rooms, he spent a day airing them out, cleaning them thoroughly and using what disinfectants and smell eradicators he could find and buy in the stalls here. The peculiar-looking 5-sided rooms were comfortably furnished by Australian standards, and not too bad even from the earthly ones. The walls and ceilings and floors were painted in fairly harmonious colors, and there was a sort of half-matting, half-carpet rug on the floors. What corresponded to the living room contained 2 of their low, backless stools, and 1 comfortable lounging chair. There was a large and a small table, and an empty case where one could store any reading scrolls he might possess. The bedroom had a low, foot-high, 5-sided bed, but it was hard and uncomfortable until Hanlon figured out how to make it softer and more to his liking. There were several pegs on the wall from which to hang his clothing, 2 more of the backless stools in the open place, a sort of well running from roof to basement. That was the toilet. Hanlon found a large piece of heavy cloth, something like canvas, in one of the stalls and made a hanging to cover this in lieu of a door, which shut out some of the smell source. The kitchen had shelves, a stove, and a table, and backless stools. In one corner, suspended through the ceiling, was an open water pipe with a sort of concrete drain beneath. This was both the source of water for cooking or drinking and the bathing place, a primitive shower. The reels furnished by survey had told Hanlon that some of the Australian buildings were more than 5 stories high. Some in the business districts may run to 6 or 7 stories. We have concluded that the main reason for this is that the natives do not have elevators, except a few crude rope-and-pulley freight elevators in some of the stores and office buildings. Now Hanlon sauntered slowly along the street, enjoying the fresh night air, warmed to about 65 degrees Fahrenheit, while he worked the kinks out of his tension-wearied body. This business of controlling the roaches demanded such intense concentration that his mind and body were highly keyed up when he finished, and he had trouble relaxing. He saw, almost without noticing this time, the primitive street lighting system that made flickering lights and shadows, on the tree-shaded walks and roads. These people used natural gas for their nighttime outdoor illuminating, just semi-ornate standards, with the flames rising a foot or so above them. Men went around at dusk to light them, and again at dawn to turn them off. Hanlon had walked slowly for several blocks when he saw a native approaching him. When they came abreast, the man stopped him. "I do not remember seeing you about here before," he said, looking closely at Hanlon in the flickering lights. "I am the peacekeeper for this district," he added as he saw Hanlon's questioning look. "No, I just moved in a few days ago," Hanlon answered. "What do you do here? Do you have a job?" "He thinks I'm a vag." Hanlon grinned to himself and said aloud in a courteous voice, "I just came from the eastern continent, Nair, and hope to become a public entertainer. I have enough money to support myself until I can earn more." "That is good. If I can ever be of service in helping you to get acquainted, please look me up. I like to see all the people in my district happy and busy." "I shall do that, Nair, and thank you for your courtesy." And as the man moved to one side, Hanlon gave him a cheery half-salute and went on his way. "Darn nice people, really," he said to himself. "They'll make good Federation citizens." When Hanlon had started out on his stroll, he had no special destination and was merely out for a breather. But as he ambled along, a thought came to him, and he quickened his pace and walked more purposefully toward the downtown section and a certain building he had previously spotted. It was a small place where men drank, and his investigations had convinced him that many of this city's criminal element went there for relaxation. The cafe occupied the street floor of a small two-storied building that was, as were almost all of the Australian buildings, a five-sided one. For 5 was the sacred number of the native religion and philosophy. Hanlon had learned that the number 5 was consistently used wherever possible, even in their architecture, their ornaments, and their coined money. Their religion was based on 5 basic truths, taught by He who died for them. These were love, faith, brotherliness, honor, and loyalty. Their philosophy, they called it their code of living, was also composed of 5 parts: to be religious, to attain the highest possible mentality, to live physically clean lives, to be considerate of others always, and to be honest in all dealings. The Terrans had found that while, of course, there were individuals who did not subscribe either to their religion or their code of living, that on the whole the race held a very high standard of ethics. Now, as he walked inside the drinking place, the young SS man saw that the pentagonal room was brilliantly lighted, rather than kept dim as were most Terran and Simonidian cafes. Probably because they can't turn 'em low, he thought, for the lights were lamps burning a carbide compound that gave out a harsh but very bright light. As Hanlon took a seat at a small table, he looked about him interestedly. There was a bar across the back or a third side where the drinks were mixed. On the other 4 sides, except where the windows or doors interfered, were several small booths, with drawn curtains across their entrances for privacy. The balance of the floor was filled with 2, 3, and 5-place pentagonal tables, and their chairs, or rather backless stools. "What's your wish?" An attendant came to Hanlon's table. "Glass of Mikhail, please." While the waiter was bringing the barely intoxicating but very popular drink, and later as Hanlon was slowly sipping it, the SS man let his mind roam throughout the small room, touching mind after mind, seeking and hoping to find those he had come here trying to locate. He had to grit his teeth to keep from showing the frustration he felt on this world, while trying to understand what these people were thinking. for he had long since found that whatever a human might be speaking in words, his thoughts showed his true feelings simultaneously, with and despite what he was saying. And Hamlin could usually read those surface thoughts and understand them fully. But with Estrellans, he had found this was not always true. There was sometimes an obliqueness that could not be directly translated by one no more used to their thought patterns than he was so far. George Hannon was the only member of the Interstellar Corps Secret Service who could read minds at all, one of the very few humans ever to possess this ability to any demonstrable extent, and he was still young enough to feel occasionally that he was being badly treated by his inability to read these natives' minds at all. While he was on that Simonidian assignment and on the planet of Algon, he had even learned to telepath with the natives, the Gudu, Greenies, or plant men. But here he could not do that at all. He could read and control animal minds, and these lousy Estrellans are almost animals, he had growled beneath his breath at first, so why can't I handle their minds? But even though this rude shock to his vanity, he did not entirely lose his ability to think and reason logically. He had studied the problem intensely for these past days, and had come to certain preliminary conclusions. It's not, after all, that they're lower in the evolutionary scale than we Terrans are, he finally concluded. It's just that they haven't advanced as far in scientific and technological knowledge. They may look like apes, but they sure aren't. Probably, when we get to really know them, if we ever do, we'll find that they are way ahead of us in many things. They certainly, as a whole, practice their code of living far better than most of our people do their professed religion. This conclusion was another shock to his confident young mind, for he had more than half expected, when he first came here, to have an easy time of it in solving the problem on which he and the other Secret Service men were working. Yet how quickly he had been disabused. And now in this place where men drank, he was finding it out anew. None of the minds he was scanning, with all the ability he possessed, was quite of the caliber he sought, although most of them displayed leanings toward larceny and other criminal tendencies. For this drinking place was not one which the more generally law-abiding and decent people of Stiara cared to patronize. Maddeningly meager were the thoughts he could interpret. But when he finally came to scan the minds of 4 natives who were seated at a 5-place table near the back, close to the bar, he made an almost unconscious exclamation of surprise and delight. He listened in more closely to the 4, who were leaning toward each other, talking together in low, earnest tones. Hanlon could read the surface thoughts in each mind, but only occasionally at first could he understand what they were discussing. However, as he became more accustomed to their individual peculiarities of thought, he began to get enough to convince him that these were the ones he was seeking. At least, they were planning some deviltries, and one spoke as though he had received orders as to what they were to do. Hanlon even finally got their names, although of the latter he soon became interested mainly in that of the slender, blondishly hairy native with the steely blue eyes. That one, Ran Alden, was their leader, Hanlon decided. More intently now, Hanlon studied their minds, paying no further attention to the others in the room. He lingered over his drinks for nearly an hour, listening in on the conversation of these mobsters, and learning quite a bit about their criminal activities, and better how to interpret their thoughts. Suddenly he stiffened in even closer attention. The leader, Alden, was saying to his henchman, but Hanlon knew from his side thoughts that the fellow meant Eno yonder. Wants us to start a series of fires and wreckings about the city. We'll get a list of places tomorrow or next day, and that night we'll do the job. In the name of Zappa, why? One of the men asked. Why would he want us to do that? Who cares why? Alden shrugged. The leader, he tells us do this, and we do it, and that's all. Sure, another chimed in. We get paid for our work, and good pay, too. So, let the big fellows worry about why they want certain things done. That's the way to look at it, Alden said. We'll meet here tomorrow evening, and I'll probably have the list. If not tomorrow, then the next day. But meet here tomorrow anyway. So Hanlon thought swiftly, just like small-time crooks everywhere. Somebody with brains does the bossing, and they stupidly follow orders, interested only in the pay they receive, caring nothing about who or what gets hurt. These fellows were certainly worth watching, he decided. Even if it did not lead him to the larger goal he was seeking, and he felt sure it would, he would spike their plans somehow. He felt he had heard enough for the time being, and so he rose and left the drinking place before they'd notice him. He walked slowly back to his apartment, thinking about his new plan, wondering, as the mobsters had done, why such orders were given. It made no sense to him, unless it was that the chief criminals were merely intent on spreading a reign of terror and destruction. Or are they, he thought suddenly, planning later to make it seem as though we Terrans are doing it? Perhaps planning to start a whispering campaign of such rumors? More than ever now he was determined that such activities must be stopped. We've got to clean up this planet and get it into the Federation. If they keep on this way, they can be a real menace. But with this criminal activity wiped out and Estrella a member of the Federation, we can help them so much. And they have a lot to teach us, too. Chapter 3. The following day, Hammond continued working with his roches. He now drilled them as soldiers are drilled. He taught himself how to control their minds in unison, making them march in all the various complicated maneuvers of squads and columns, all in perfect alignment and cadence. It was tricky, delicate work, requiring, as it did, placing a portion of his mind in each roche's brain, giving that mind and body individual commands, yet keeping enough central control in his own mind so they all performed exactly together. So much of his mind was transferred to theirs that he had to learn how to make his own body stand at attention during these maneuvers, with but minimum control over his own functions. Hour after hour he worked with them, giving them 15 minutes of rest out of each half hour, and thus giving his own brain rest at the same time, for this was tiring work for him as well as for them. When dusk fell, he stopped the training, saw to it that the roches were well fed and watered, and then he put 'em all to sleep. He dressed for the street, went out and found an eating place, where he did full justice to a good meal. One thing you've got to hand these folks, he thought thankfully, they certainly can cook, even though some of their dishes have a most unusual taste. It had taken him several days to discover which native dishes he liked and could digest, for some of them almost made him ill. Others had a taste he could not stomach, but most of them were delicious, and Hanlon was ordinarily a good trencherman. His meal finished, Hanlon paid and went back to the drinking place where he sat, toying with a glass of Michiel while waiting for Alden and the others to appear. They came in shortly, one by one, and Hanlon listened in on Alden's mind as the chief mobster gave his fellows directions as to the places they were to burn or wreck. Hanlon had already prepared a note addressed to the head of the local peacekeepers. To this he now added the addresses Alden was giving. When he was sure he had them all, he slipped out of the little cafe. He went swiftly along the streets toward the Sierra Police Headquarters, which he had previously located, keeping watch until he saw a dog-like roach running along. Quickly reaching out and taking control of its mind, Hanlon made the animal follow him until he could duck into a deserted doorway. Hanlon made his messenger take the prepared note carefully into its mouth, then trot down to the street and into the police station. There, it ran up to the man in charge and raised itself up with its front paws on the man's knees. Where in the name of... The official looked down, eyes bugging and mouth slack at the beast's unexpected action. For several moments, he seemed not to even notice the paper in the roach's mouth. When he did, he took it gingerly, opened and read it. An attempt will be made just before half-night, Hanlon had written, to set fire to or wreck the following places of businesses. If you watch carefully, you can catch the criminals in the act and save these pieces of property from damage or destruction. Then followed the 5 addresses. The man read the note twice, a puzzled, anxious frown on his face. He did not quite know what to make of it, or so his attitude seemed to indicate. There had been no crime on this planet that he had ever had occasion to try to stop, for he was not a police officer in the ordinary sense. The Australian peacekeepers merely watched to see that crowds or individuals did not get too boisterous, aided in handling crowds at large gatherings, or assisted home those who may have imbibed too freely. The fellow scratched the back of his head while he considered the matter at length. Some fiddy trying to make a fool of me, he finally said aloud, as Hanlon heard through his roach's ears, as he had been watching through its eyes. But how in the name of Zappa did whoever it was train this roach to bring me the note like this? This latter problem seemed to have greater interest for him than the warning, for his eyes were still watching the roach with puzzled inquiry, but he did nothing about acting upon Hanlon's suggestion. As the SS man watched the roach leave the peacekeepers' headquarters, he fumed because it was apparent that the official was going to take no action on his warning. Were they in on this criminal activity, he wondered? Was it that widespread that even the supposed law-keepers were party to it? No, he finally decided. Probably this fellow was just a dumb, unimaginative sort of dope. He watched miserably as the fires were set and the business buildings wrecked. There was nothing else he could do to stop it, for he knew it would only put himself in useless danger to try. Why jeopardize what he and the other Secret Servicemen were trying to accomplish here? But as soon as the damage had been done, he found another roach and sent it back to headquarters with another scathing note. You paid no attention to my previous warning, and as a result, 2 of the buildings I told you about have been set on fire, the windows smashed on another, and 2 others have been wrecked by explosions. Why don't you use what small brains you possess and stop this wave of crime? Or are you being paid to ignore it? Through the eyes of the roach, Hanlon watched the official read the note and saw him fly into a rage and pace the floor. But what was the man thinking? Hanlon was too far away to read. One thing sure, I'll have to get busy and make contact with these gangsters. Hanlon thought bitterly as he went back to his room and to bed. Guess I'm near enough ready to tackle Yander now. Let's see. Shall I do it directly, or... He undressed and climbed into the low, foot-high, 5-sided bed these Australians used. There was no mattress or springs, but fortunately his rooms had several extra blankets, and these he had folded beneath him to make his sleeping more comfortable. He was still wrestling with his problem when he finally dropped off to sleep. Well, I'm going to take a little break here and put on a little music, and I'll see you in just a few minutes. Alrighty, I am back. But the next day, he figured it out to his satisfaction. He worked with his roaches until evening, then went out and got himself a meal. Later he went, purposefully late, into the drinking place. Seeing Alden and his men already at their table, he went directly up to them. "Greetings, Ran Alden," he said boldly. "I've been looking for you, for I want to join your group. I'm fast and clever with a knife or a flame gun, and I got plenty of ideas. I can do us both a lot of good." The other three half rose, staring at him with hostile eyes, but their chief made a gesture that said, "Wait," and himself looked at Hanlon up and down coolly. "You are mistaken, my friend," he said at last. "We are not engaged in such activities as might require the use of knife or gun. We are lawful businessmen." Hanlon fitted his face to a crooked smile, and his voice was almost sarcastic as he replied, Sure, I know. But listen, friend, a fellow out to make a big pile of pentas doesn't do it by being asleep. I've done a lot of scouting round and asking questions in a discreet way. I know who I'm talking to." His mind, always in touch with that of the others, read in their surface thoughts the surprised, "Oh, so that's why we've had the feeling the past few days that we're being watched." He could tell that his conclusion made them jittery and more cautious and ready for instant action. But Hanlon had to keep on the path he had taken. Aloud, Alden merely said again, in a voice he kept mild and low, "I'm sorry, my friend, but you are mistaken. We work for another man, helping him hunt out talented people and make entertainers out of them." "During the day, yes," Hanlon gave him a wise smile. "And I can help you a lot in that, too." He knew the three other men had been growing more and more angry at his interruption. He could interpret their thoughts well enough, so he was tensed and ready for quick action, determined not to be caught off guard. "But what I'm really interested in," Hanlon continued, "is your evening activities. By the way, I hope none of you got hurt or burned last." He wheeled swiftly, for one of the natives had suddenly leaped up and toward him, a dagger in his hand, slashing at him. Hanlon met him with a light, contemptuous laugh. He ducked beneath the other's knife slash, then stepped in close. His left fist traveled only a few inches, but all the strength of his powerful shoulder and arm muscles was in the blow. His first sank to the wrist, in the man's solar plexus. Wind whooshing out, the gangster doubled up in pain. Hanlon chopped down with the edge of his hand on the other's wrist, and the knife clattered to the floor. The corpsman swung viciously, with a right uppercut that lifted his attacker and drove him backward. He crashed into a chair with such force that his man and stool fell to the floor. The wooden seat was splintered. The other two leaped to their feet and started forward, as though he had eyes in the back of his head and had seen them coming. Hanlon swiveled toward them, his lips thinned in a fighting grin, while several of the cafe attendants were running up. "Leave him alone," Ran Alden commanded sharply, and his men looked back at him in astonishment. The stranger was only defending himself against an unprovoked attack by Ugin, Alden explained to the cafe's men. He turned to his fellows. You two, take Ugin home and put him to bed. I want to talk to the stranger. As the surly guards picked up the limp body of their fallen companion and bore him out, the drink servers returned to their posts. Evidently, Ran Alden was known and respected here. He now faced Hanlon and motioned towards one of the stools. "Sit down, my friend," he said courteously. "Perhaps we can do a bit of talking." "No use for knives, eh?" Hanlon grinned as he sat down, but immediately he sobered. "I figured maybe you'd be willing to talk, although I didn't expect to have to slap down one of your boys to make you. I'm sorry if I hurt him." And Hanlon was sincere in this. He had momentarily forgotten that he was on a lighter planet, with a gravity only about 90% that of Terra, and that consequently he would be naturally stronger than the average Australian native. While this would not have kept him from defending himself from that sudden vicious attack, he would have pulled his punches a bit had he thought. He did not like killing or injuring people. But Alden was answering, and Hanlon knew he'd better be on his toes and pay strict attention. There were undertones and concepts behind the spoken words that were hard for this Terran mind to interpret. "You don't need to be sorry," Alden assured him. "Ugin was useful in a way, but he's stupid. I don't especially like stupid people." He studied Hanlon closely. "I don't think you're stupid." "I don't know it all, by any means," the SS man said with a disarming candor, "but I never considered myself simple." "Now, what makes you think we are engaged in anything illegal during our evenings? Look, Nair, let's not you and me chase ourselves around a flower tree. If I'm out of line, say so, and I'll take a run. But since we're talking here together all peaceful-like, and there's nobody within hearing distance if we talk low, let's put it on the penta, shall we, huh?" Ran Alden looked at Hanlon another moment, his face and thoughts showing puzzlement at the stranger's choice of words. Then he laughed quietly. "By Zappa, I like you. My friend, what's your name?" "Gore Anlo." "You're a cool one, all right. Where you from? I've not seen you around Stiara before." "No, I'm from Lura, over on the eastern continent. The goody-goodies are mostly in charge there, and there's no way for a hustler to make a fast pile. So I came here, hoping there'd be more chances for me. I've been here 6-7 days looking over the ground and making a little investigation. The best leads pointed to your boss, Eno Yander." Alden started at the name, and while he was staring anew at Hanlon, the latter's mind flashed back over that investigation. His first day had been spent getting the feel of the city through wide-open mental searchings. Not so much from individuals at first, but from the mass thoughts of the many. He had later touched hundreds of minds and studied them, trying to learn how to interpret those alien thoughts. He had no trouble getting the thoughts themselves. It was what they meant that puzzled and troubled him. Now, having noted the start Alden made at mention of Eno Yander's name, and the close, searching look the mobster bent toward him, Hanlon continued quickly, with an appearance of great intensity and seriousness. "I figured that I could get to him easier through one of his seconds in command, and picked on you." "One of his—" Alden started to ask, then quickly changed his mind. "Because you thought I was more weak-minded?" There was now a hint of anger in the cold eyes. "Not on your life, Ran Alden. Because I figured, after studying the setup, that you were about ready to take over in his place one of these days, probably soon, and that would put me closer to the real power and the big money." I see." Alden was silent for some time, digesting all this in his mind. He was pleased at the compliment, but somewhat startled at two pieces of information Hanlon had so carelessly tossed out. One, that apparently Alden was not Yander's chief or only second-in-command, and two, that this stranger had so quickly and easily divined his secret ambition. Hanlon, reading his mind, could discern and understand all this, although he knew when Alden began trying to figure out whether this newcomer was legitimately on the make, or whether he was a spy sent by someone, perhaps even Yander, to check up on him. The last statement of Hanlon's really upset him more than the first, which he had sometimes suspected. He worried about the latter now. It was the truth, all right, but he had not yet thought anyone else knew it or even suspected it. Did Yander suspect it? If so, Alden knew he was in for trouble, bad trouble. Hanlon decided it was time for him to do a little steering. "Look, Alden," he interrupted the other's somewhat frightened thinking. "Why not take me to Yander and introduce me? Let him decide whether he wants to let me in or not." For a long moment, Alden stared again at Hanlon, but when he finally answered, there was a note of relief in his voice that he tried to conceal. Yet he was not entirely convinced that this might not be all part of an espionage trick formed in the fertile but hellishly devious mind of his superior, Eno Yander. But Alden was one who preferred to meet his dangers face to face, when they could not be avoided. "That might not be a bad idea," he said as calmly as he could. "But look, my friend, don't try to play me for an easy fool. I'd do things about it if you did." "Sure, I know that." Hanlon's voice was bland and ingenuous. "I'm not figuring on your job, being a yunner. I know I've got to begin low and work up. A chance to get started is all I want, for now." Alden rose, took some of the 5-sided silver pentas from his pocket, and dropped them on the table. "Fair enough. Come on." The two were mostly silent as they walked along the narrow, unpaved, crooked streets, past the not-too-tall, 5-sided buildings of the mercantile establishments of the district. After a few blocks of the winding, twisted streets. Didn't these folks ever learn anything about surveying? Hanlon often wondered. They turned down a tree-shaded residential street. They walked past increasingly pretentious houses, which Hanlon knew were of the ubiquitous, pentagonal construction so general on this planet. It was this unusual type of buildings that Hanlon found it hard to adjust to. The first day or two on this planet, and in this city, the odd shapes and crooked streets had so distracted him, he had trouble concentrating on his job. Now he looked interestingly at the almost universal green-tiled roofs, and also at the gardens of beautiful but strangely unearthly flowers. He saw, too, the thick-trunked, low but wide-spreading flower trees that lined the streets, and were heavily planted in most of the yards surrounding the houses. He tried, naturally, to see if these latter had any minds he could touch. Ever since knowing these plant-like gurus, this had become almost automatic with him, at sight of any new kind of tree, bush or plant. But he drew a blank here, as he had elsewhere. Those alien growths on Algon might be unique in the universe, he thought. Hanlon was glad of Alden's silence as they walked along. It enabled him to get his own thoughts in order, and to try and plan as best he could for this coming interview with Yander, not knowing what to expect, except that it would undoubtedly try his abilities to the utmost. There were still some slight traces of fear in his mind, for he was, after all, still a very young and inexperienced man, playing a dangerous game. but his success in his first assignment, the dangers he had faced and the victories he had wrested because of his unusual and growing wild talent, thoughts of them brought back his self-confidence, and with it an almost contemptuous view of the dangers here. There was really nothing to fear after all, he told himself. But still, Hanlon and Alden came to a place in the street where it climbed a fairly steep hill. There were many such throughout the city, and were nearly winded when they finally reached the top. Still wordless, they were both glad of the chance to stop and rest a moment. Then they started on again, along a much nicer part of the street, rapidly approaching the home of Eno yonder. This entertainment entrepreneur, that was in effect the nearest approach to a familiar profession of which Hamlet could think, was the one the young Secret Serviceman's investigations had led him to believe was the first rung on the ladder he must climb to find the knowledge that lay at the top. "Ah, here's the place," Alden said at last as they turned up the sort of cobbled walk leading to the fairly imposing residence. It was an ornately decorated two-story house, pentagonal in shape, and with a green-tiled roof, of course. The three sides, Hammond could see, were painted in different, though mutually complementary colors. The surrounding lawns were made of the peculiar grass so general here, with its minutely petaled flower tips. There were also numerous beds of the strange native flowers, highly perfumed, but not heavily blossomed except in the mass. Hamlin thought he caught large numbers of thought emanations from the animal minds of various kinds, but before he could investigate, Alden spoke. "One word of warning. Don't be too eager. Yander may seem slow-thinking and calculating, but don't make the mistake of thinking him stupid. And don't irritate him. He seldom shows his temper, but he is deadly vindictive to those he takes a dislike to. But he is a good employer, and generous to those who serve him well and efficiently. Thanks for the tip. I'll be on my good behavior." But Hanlon grinned to himself as he read the reason for that warning in Alden's mind. If this stranger was spying for Yander, he would have to make a good report on Alden. Then, as the mobster used the ornate knocker, Hanlon tensed himself for literally anything. Chapter 4. After a considerable wait, the door was opened. By the light from inside, George Hanlon saw a fairly tall native, his hair and beard sleek and burnished from much brushing, and trimmed with unusual care. He was wearing a sort of slip-on gown of heavy cloth, probably a lounging robe. Perhaps the men had already gone to bed, in which case he would undoubtedly be quite provoked at their untimely call, Hamlin thought. Indeed, the man's face showed surprise and petulance at this interruption. But Hamlin could see shrewdness and a crafty trickiness inherent in the black eyes that caused an inward tremor. "I sure better be on my toes with this fellow," he thought. Yander scanned the two for a long moment without a word, then beckoned them inside. But as soon as the door was shut and locked, he turned angrily on Alden. "Well now, what's the big idea, you stupid idiot, a-comin' here and at night, and bringing someone with you? Are you trying to cross me, Ran? You know that isn't healthy." Ran Aldrin cringed somewhat and made his voice apologetic. "It's because it's night nigher, and we wouldn't be noticed that I came now. Besides, I think this is important. I want you to meet Gore Anlow, who's just come from Lura, looking for a chance, he says, to get into our businesses." Alden slightly emphasized that last word, and Yander's eyes snapped wide. He swung around and faced Hanlon, studying him carefully. The young man bore the scrutiny without flinching, a smile of greeting on his face, but without a sign of boldness or brashness. After a moment, Yander motioned them into an adjoining room, and himself went in to sit behind a large, ornate, wooden desk table. "Sit." He waved a delicate hand at the two chairs facing him in such a manner that the desk lamp's light was strong in the faces of the two, while leaving his own more or less in the shadows. Hanlon could barely repress a grin, as it smacked so intimately of the old Terran police questioning technique. During the short moments they had been in the hallway, however, Hanlon had noticed a small roach standing there, apparently one that Yander must have partially tamed and kept as a pet. Quickly, the SS man had transferred a part of his mind into that of the beast. Now, while his own body and 9/10 of his mind were in that office room for the interview with Eno Yander, the other 10th, inside the brain of the Rush, was making the animal roam the house, seeking whatever secrets it might find there. The impresario looked at Hanlon searchingly. "Well now, so you think you'd like to get into the entertainment business, eh?" he said with an attempt at joviality. "Yes, nigher that and other things," Hanlon answered calmly. "Back in Lura, where I come from, sir, the people seem to be against the idea of a young fellow getting ahead in the world. So," shrugging, "I came where I thought there was a better chance of doing myself some good. Me, I'm out after a basketful of gold pentas, and not too particular how I get 'em," he added levelly, but in his eyes was an unmistakable message the Australian could not help reading correctly. "But there are entertainment procurers on the eastern continent." Yander was sparring for time to evaluate this situation better. "If you have a good way of pleasing the people, they would be glad to take you in hand." "Anlo isn't stupid, Yander," Alden interrupted, and Hanlon was glad he did at just that moment, for the roach had just peered through the half-open doorway of a room upstairs and found a man, probably a servant, lying there on the bed, apparently reading from a scroll. Hanlon did not especially like this spying on anyone, but he had to learn all he could about what was going on here, no matter how he gained the information. So he reached out and studied the man's mind. The fellow was not reading at the moment, he found, but was thinking of the payback he owed someone named Oval Osvor, who had obtained this position for him. This Esbor was much like a Terrarian ward boss, a minor politician, but connected with many shady dealings. Hanlon had not previously heard that name, but made a mental note to investigate the man further. He might be another lead. The SS man withdrew his mind after a bit and sent the roach searching the other rooms. He noticed quite a few animal pets about the house, but thought nothing special of it at the time. Meanwhile he, in his own person, began paying more attention to what Alden and Yander were saying. "Been in town several days," he says, looking over the situation. "How he found out, I don't know, but he knows all our businesses." Yander barely repressed a start of surprise, and his crafty black eyes narrowed. "Why are you spying on— No, who are you spying on us for?" he demanded in cold tones that again sent a shiver down Hanlon's spine, for there was no mercy or lack of ruthlessness in that tone, nor in the man's attitude. Yet at the same time, the young man realized stunningly that Yander, too, was as much afraid of his superior as Alden was of Yander, and Hanlon knew after a fleet scanning of the gangster's mind that he now felt relief that Yander had not been investigating him through Hanlon. But the young SS man had been reading the impresario's thoughts as best he could, as well as hearing what he was saying. He felt that he knew now how to handle this agent. As Alden said, I'm not stupid, and I'm on the make for my fortune. I knew the only way was to check first and talk later. So I asked seemingly innocuous questions here and there, and I'm wise enough never to ask more than one from any one person. That way I found out a lot. I do know something about the entertainment business, and can hold up my end of the performance. But I also know the really big money is in other things you control. Yander did gasp at that. His face grew black, and he half rose and opened his mouth to say something, but Hanlon beat him to it. Incidentally, he lowered his voice, but still kept it penetrant, as he leaned forward confidentially. There's someone in the next room listening through that door there to what we're saying. At Hanlon's quiet words, Enor Yander's eyes opened wide, while Ran Audlin barely repressed an exclamation. Neither guessed, of course, that the stranger was looking through the eyes of Yander's pet Roche, which, in the course of its investigation of the house for Hanlon's benefit, had come to the open doorway of that adjoining room, and had seen the man kneeling there, his ear pressed against the door panels, listening intently. Now, Yander reached into a sort of pigeonhole in his table desk, and quietly took out a flame gun. Tensing himself, he suddenly swung his chair about, and leaped to the door. Flinging it open, he found, indeed, another man there, before that other could rise and run. Grabbing the spy's collar with one surprisingly strong hand, Yandor yanked him to his feet and into the light. "Ondo!" he exclaimed. "Well now, what in the name of Zappa were you doing?" The small man cringed. "Pardon, Nair, I was only trying to make sure that no one was attempting to harm you, and standing by to help you if they were." "I think he's lying," Hanlon said, knowing from his quick probe into the other's mind that he was. "I'll bet he's a spy for someone." This last, he knew, however, was not correct. Ondo was regularly employed by Yander as a houseman, but he was one of those intensely curious and inquisitive people who always try to find out everything that goes on in any house they happen to be working in. "By Zappa, you'll never spy on me again." Yander's face grew livid. "You know better'n to cross me. You know it isn't healthy." And before anyone could guess what he was about to do, the raging impresario chopped down with the butt of his flamer, and Ondo fell unconscious to the floor, blood welling from a gash in his forehead. The furious entrepreneur was swinging the weapon into firing position to kill the fallen man, when Hanlon leaped forward and grasped his arm, holding him back. "Wait, Nair, don't sender him," he said almost in a tone of command. "Wouldn't look well for a man of your public position if word of it ever leaked out." "I will kill the snake," Ran Alden spat. "There's no sense taking chances with the man we know's a spy." "No!" Hanlon was still quietly determined to save Ondo's life. He spoke as impressively as he could. "Such a killing, with a body disposed of, would most certainly be traced back to you in time, Nair, and you would lose much of your respect that the public holds for you. Your success as your other endeavors is largely due to the fact that everyone knows you for such a high-principled, public-spirited citizen, that no one suspects you of being anything else. Don't take chances on spoiling that reputation." Yander was swayed by his impassioned appeal. It was plain to be seen. His respect for Hanlon's quick good sense and sound judgment mounted, and he looked at the young man with new interest. "Anlo's right, Ran," he told his lieutenant. "We mustn't have a killing on our hands that can be so easily traced to us." He turned back to Hanlon. who was grinning inwardly at Yander's almost panic that made him forget for the moment that there were no real police detectives on this world who could so easily track back a killing, especially if only ordinary precautions were used to dispose of the body. "Well, now, I thank you for saving me from the risk my temper might have caused. What would you suggest we do with this?" He pushed at the body with his foot. "It's easy to see that Ondo is only a scared rat, and when he wakes up, he'll know he'd better keep away from you or he'll really be killed." Hanlon spoke carelessly. "Just have Alden take him out and dump him on the next street. Ondo will never bother you again, I'm positive." Alden seemed about to protest, but Yander forestalled him. "That's good advice. Take care of it, Alden." And after the gangster had left the house with his burden, Yander resumed his seat and motioned Hanlon to take the one he had formerly occupied. But while they were doing this, the young SS man had sent his mind outdoors, found the sleeping bird and taken over its mind. He made it follow Alden, so he would know where Ondo's body was taken. He would try to save the fellow's life if he could. He had got him into this predicament, and it was up to him to get the chap safely out of it. "Well now," Yander was saying, "I'm beginning to believe you will be a valuable man in our group. I'll think about it some more and see you sometime tomorrow and we'll talk further about it. But I'm only promising to talk," he added hurriedly. "I'm not saying what my decision will be. That's all I could ask for now, for I know I can prove my own worth." He rose and bowed courteously. "So I'll see you at your place of business in the morning." "You know where it is?" surprisedly. "But of course." As soon as he was out of the house, Hanlon went carefully to the weed-infested vacant lot where Alden had dropped Ondo's body. When he saw the gangster returning, Hanlon quickly hid behind a great flower tree. Hanlon had brought the bird back to Yander's house, and now made it perch where it could look through a window. Through the bird's eyes he saw the two inside, talking together for some minutes, Yander apparently very angry, Alden on the defensive. Then the slender mobster slunk from the house and started back toward the downtown section. Hanlon made the bird follow him to make sure Alden was really going home and was not circling about trying to find out where Hanlon was and what he was doing or where he was going. Then the SS man went to the vacant lot to find Ondo sitting up, holding his aching head. Almost roughly he jerked him to his feet. "Look, you thiety!" Hanlon made his voice deadly menacing. "I don't like people who go around trying to find out about me and my business. Yander merely insisted that I see to it that you left town immediately, but I'm not that soft-hearted. I'm going to kill you. Then I'll know you've done your last snooping." He reached toward his pocket as though for a knife or a flame gun. The man was a small, terror-stricken rat, but he was not entirely lacking in the universal will to live. Suddenly he half stooped, then jumped forward, his shoulder crashing into Hanlon's body. The young corpsman could have maintained his balance, but he let himself fall, as though he'd been knocked down by the blow. Ondo took off like a scared Dara, and in brief seconds was out of sight. Hanlon waited several minutes, then went down the street toward his rooming house, grinning to himself. He was happy that it could have worked out that way. He was sure this Ondo would leave Stiara without delay. Hanlon's hint about that was enough, he was sure, especially since he knew Ondo was convinced that he would be killed out of hand if he ever allowed himself to be seen hereabouts again. As he walked swiftly along, Hanlon released the bird from its mental spell, for it was now apparent Alden was really going downtown or home. But before releasing the bird, Hanlon guided it back to a comfortable perch in a tree and put it to sleep. He could not help feeling gratitude, yet still with an odd sense of wonder about his ability to control animal minds. He remembered so vividly that day on the great space liner Helene, When he had discovered this tremendous ability with the little puppy, what was its name? Oh yeah, Gypsy. And the still greater thrill when he was experimenting later with the dogs on the kennel deck and had found that he could not only read their complete minds and control their nerves and muscles to make them follow his bidding, but that he could also dissociate a portion of his mind, put it in their brains, and leave it there, connected with the balance of their own mind merely by a slender thread of consciousness, yet able to think and act independently. But it certainly came in mighty handy in his work as a Secret Service man, and he was thankful to whatever powers may be that had given him this ability to do these amazing things. Now, if he could only learn how to read and control the whole mind and body of a human, instead of being able to read only their surface thoughts. But he was trying to learn to be content with what he had, and to use it thankfully. Yet he never ceased trying to learn more, to be able to do more along those lines. Finally, back in his room, Hanlon grinned again to himself as he began undressing. He felt good. He had put it over again. He was sure he was in. He sat down on a chair and removed the special shoes he was wearing. These native Australians were very manlike, in shape as well as mentality. But there were enough structural differences, so it had taken the expert cosmetician many hours to fix him up to look like one of them. These shoes, for instance, because Australians had unusually large feet, were really shoes within shoes, to fit his feet correctly inside, and yet appear large enough on the outside not to attract attention. In the spaceship high above, intent thoughts had been coursing through the mind of the being. Finally, certain commands were impressed upon the mind of the Australian native, the being controlled, that would set in motion a new train of events. The native cringed as the thoughts came into his mind. They were not the kinds of things he would ever consider of himself. They outraged his every sense of right and justice. It made him actually physically sick, even to contemplate them, and he wondered briefly how he had ever come to get such ideas. Yet something, he could not guess what, forced him to do them, despite his every struggling, heartsick efforts not to obey the commands he did not even know were commands. Chapter 5. As SSM George Hanlon continued undressing, he recalled his parting with his father on Simonides. "How soon do I start?" he had asked, boyishly eager, at the close of their interview. "Right away?" "Whoa, son, not so fast," the Admiral laughed. "You'll have to have a series of inoculation shots against the Australian diseases. Then you'll have to learn a lot, and especially you'll have to be disguised to look like a native, which isn't easy. Here are reels of the language, customs, and geography. Get a room in the hotel here and learn them. I think you'll find the language not too hard. It is a simple, uncomplicated one, outside of their habit of putting the verbs ahead of the nouns, and then the adjectives or adverbs. As to their way of thought, well, that's not far different, even with your ability to read their minds. I'll bet you have trouble in understanding them for some time. I'm not always sure I do even yet. Tough, eh? That they are. You can't work 'em like you do humans. Their concepts seem not at all like ours in so many ways. We can get in serious trouble through misunderstanding their apparently straightforward words, so go slow and easy." "I'll watch for that, Dad. and bone up on the rest as fast as I can. Meanwhile, how's about going out and wrapping ourselves around a couple of thick steaks, or some of that good poika at the Golden Web? I'd like to see Hooper again. The grub I'll buy, but Kurt isn't here. He's one of the boys working Australia with me. The lessons learned in time. Hanlon visit-phoned Admiral Howardin at base, who sent the cosmetician to him at the hotel. The shoes had only been part of the job. There was the smock coat, which Hanlon was now removing in his room in Stiaria. Australians had narrow, sloping shoulders, so a tailor had to make special clothes. The coat, almost like a knee-length, slip-over sweater, only of a heavy cloth like homespun, with shoulders whose cut and padding gave them the proper sloping look. There was also the divided skirt sort of pantaloons that gathered at the ankle. As he undressed, Hanlon looked at himself in the mirror and grinned. Trevor had dyed his skin all over, not the dark red of Terran Indians, not yet the black of Negroes nor the brown of Malayans, but sort of a deep pink. Hanlon had been warned not to take either tub or shower baths, but had been supplied with a bottle of special chemical. Naked at last, he scratched luxuriously and stretched hugely. He poured a bowlful of water, added 7 drops of the chemical, then gave himself a sponge bath. As he was washing his face, he noticed with amusement the way his ears had been built up with plastic to almost twice their natural size, and the way his nose had been made so much broader, like a giant ape's, it spread over half the width of his face. He was careful not to pull off any of the hair that had been so painstakingly glued to his body to simulate the general hairiness of the Australians. And of course, he had neither shaved nor had a haircut since being assigned this job, and his beard was growing nicely. But it, and the body hair, was the most uncomfortable part of his impostor. The darn stuff itched, but bad, and he scratched. Anyway, he thought thankfully, Trevor had done a really good job on him. No one yet met here had seemed to notice anything out of the way with him, as far as his looks went. He had easily passed everywhere as a real native. A 2-man speedster had brought him to this planet, and had landed him just outside the city they call Stiara, in the dead of night. His father, he knew, had preceded him by nearly 2 weeks, was here somewhere, as were Manning and Hooper, the 2 other SS men assigned here. A sneak boat came every 2 weeks, and stayed at a designated spot near the principal city on each continent, from midnight until 3 in the morning, in case any of the men wanted to send messages or needed assistance of any kind. Undressed and scratched and washed and scratched, Hanlon lay down in his bed and gave himself up to thoughts of the coming interview at Eno Yander's office. He tried to analyze what he had learned and its possible connection with whatever it was that was keeping Estrella from joining the Federation of Planets, from becoming the 58th member of the far-flung Union of Self-Governing Worlds. It seemed to him he had made a good start, although he was slightly dissatisfied with the speed at which he was not getting ahead. Yet he had felt all along, and still so thought, that with his way of working his best course lay through the criminal gangs of Stiara, that by working up through them he would eventually come to the ones who were behind all this. And he was sure this Eno Yander was his best lead to date, even though it seemed strange that an entertainment agent would be the top man in the criminal world. His father had not been too certain that this was a logical channel of investigation, but was quite willing to let Hanlon try it. The Corps had to have that information, and each man of the Secret Service would work their way that seemed best to him. Nor could the Admiral argue against Hanlon's insistence that this sudden rise of hereto unknown criminal activity, just at the same time, was not purely coincidental. For the whole thing was such a seemingly insoluble puzzle, from his own investigation since he had arrived, from the feel of the city and its inhabitants to his sensitive perceptions. Hanlon knew the people on the whole were such swell folks, the kind that would make wonderful Federation citizens, even if they did look so peculiar and animal-like to Terrans. Any race with a religion and a code of living based on common decency and high-principled honesties as theirs was bound to be a good one. From all he had been able to learn, Hanlon thought the ruler, Elis Amir, a decent fellow and extremely capable. Amir certainly had shown by his actions all during his tenure of office that while their system of government was a sort of limited autocracy, that he, at least, was trying to make it a benevolent one. Unless all the information Hanlon and the SS had gathered was haywire, this Amir was certainly not behind all of this sudden opposition. He had seemed, especially at first, to be very much in favor of joining. Then who in the name of Snyder was? Suddenly a new idea brought Hanlon upright on the bed. Was Amur merely a tool, like the Emperor of Sime had been under Bor? Was there someone here who was comparable to that devilish Highness? Somebody with Bor's brains and driving lust for power, and ever more power? Hanlon sucked in his breath in sudden wonder and worry. Was this unknown another alien from the same, or some other advanced and faraway planet, as yet unknown to the core, working to take over Estrella and possibly, or finally, the rest of the Federated Planets and the whole galaxy? It took Hanlon a long time to go to sleep, nor had he found the answers to his puzzle when he finally did drop off. When George Hanlon appeared in Yander's office just before midday, the dapper impresario ushered his visitor into an inner room and closed the door. "I think Ando has left town, or died, for I have heard nothing more of him, nor have any of my men. You were right about a killing that could be traced to me being bad for my carefully built reputation. Well now, about your working for me. You said you knew something about the entertainment business. What can you do?" "Well, I can't sing or posture, and I'm not much good at acrobatics. I can whistle a little and—" "Blow? What is that?" Yander used his definition of the word Hanlon had translated as meaning whistle. Uh-oh. Hanlon knew he had blundered. In an effort to cover up, he said, "This," and he puckered up his lips and whistled a few discordant notes, concealing the fact that he was an excellent whistler and could do perfectly dozens of bird call imitations. "No, I'm afraid that is nothing our people would care for." "Then what about an animal act?" This was the crucial point. Hanlon had given him a lot of thought to this, and had worked out the idea that he thought might apply here. It certainly would go big back on Terra, he knew, but he was not yet conversant enough with Australian theatrical acts, even though he had gone to the theater several times to study them, to know if these strange people would like it or not. But he had to get in the good graces of Yander. "What sort of animal act do you have in mind?" the impresario asked doubtfully. "Our audiences are very particular. It has to be good, very good, and unusual." "I think you'll like mine," confidently. "I've 8 pet roaches, and as—" "Roaches?" Yander looked incredulous. You mean you've somehow trained some roaches? That's right. I've trained them as a hobby. I drill them just like our ruler's resident guards do, and other things as well. I'm sure the people will like the act. I'll bring them down and show you what they can do. Well now, still hesitantly, that might be all right. It sounds most unusual, to say the least. I'll look at 'em, say the day after tomorrow? Yes, I think I'll have time then. Thank you, Nair. Then after I've shown you what I can do about that, we can talk about other things. There was a flash of anger in the snapping black eyes. Don't press me, Anlo. I go slow about things like this, and I want to know all about you first. Sure, I know that. I didn't mean to hurry you. I just wanted to remind you I was still thinking about the main thing, not merely about the little matter like being an animal trainer. He left the offices then and started toward home, but on the way he began thinking about that man, Oval Esvor, he had heard mentioned. He took a couple hours out, then to investigate many minds to see what he could learn about the fellow. He found that his initial information was correct. Esvor was a small-time local politician, but was also connected with many other businesses about the city. He ran a sort of employment agency as his business front, but there were rumors that he was also a fence for stolen goods, a panderer and narcotics agent, and many other illegal things. These latter, however, Hanlon registered in his mind as merely rumors, not facts, for he could get no direct evidence of them, even though he read about such things in many minds. But he was convinced that the man was one about whom he should learn a lot more, as he had time for such investigation. He felt sure that Esvor fitted in somewhere in the chain of criminals Hanlon was sure was tied in with a group who were trying to keep Estrella out of the Federation. He went back to his apartment then, and to the training of his roaches. He was well satisfied with them. He liked them as pets, and they had learned to like him. When he first came in, they swarmed all over him, and all of them had a good romp before he got them down to serious business. He was also quite happy about the way things were going. He was putting it over again, for he felt certain that through Yander he could get the dope he needed on the higher-ups. Yander had never even so much as denied that he had other irons in the fire than his theatrical business, and from vague ideas Hanlon had seen in the man's mind from time to time, he felt surer than ever that he was on the right track. That evening he again went out for some fresh air, and he was strolling aimlessly down the street. He saw an elderly Australian native approaching. The fellow seemed very friendly, wanting to stop and chat, and Hanlon found himself grinning inwardly at the old man's garrulous good nature, so like that of Terran elders, something he had not found here before. The young SS man touched the other's mind almost as a matter of course at the outset, and discovered that the man had lived in Stieria all his life, but was now a lonesome old widower, all his family and friends gone on before him, or moved away. Here was a good chance, Hanlon thought, both to be nice to an oldster, and to get some more general and, perhaps, specific information. "Will you do me the honor to have a drink with me, Nair?" he asked courteously, the first time the old chap gave him an opening. "There's a very nice place where men drink close by." "That's mighty kind of you, Yunner, mighty kind. Don't many people act that way to me any more. But there was a time." His voice trailed off, but Hanlon read in his thoughts of the days when the fellow was an important and popular man in this city. As they walked along the street to the drinking place, Hanlon listened with half an ear to the old fellow's chatter, while he was thinking swiftly. It had not taken him long to learn that in this secret service business he had to take information wherever and from whomever it was to be gained, and this old geezer ought to be quite a mind of gossip. Hanlon hoped he could steer it into the channels of real information. Once seated at a small table and their glasses of Michiel before them, Hanlon broke into the monologue to say engagingly, "I've been in Styria such a short time, Nair, that I don't know much about it. And since I intend to make it my home from now on, I want to know all the things I can about the things and the people here." "Hey, you come to the right place for that, Yunner. Where you from?" "I was born in Lura, over on the eastern continent, but I found that there was not much chance for a young fellow to make his fortune over there. Everything is owned by a few rich people who keep all the businesses in their own families. So I came here." "Yes, you did right. There are plenty of chances for bright young fellows to make fortunes here in Styria. Hey, I remember well." And the old fellow started in on what Hanlon knew would be a long, uninteresting resume of his past life. So he interrupted with a question, or rather a request. "Well, I think I'm going to have to stop there and pick this up next week. I hope you're enjoying listening, as I'm enjoying this book a lot. So I thank y'all for listening, and I'll see y'all next week. Bye now."